The following video is the only one you'll ever need to get yourself ready for Game Week 30. Starting things off, we've got the top players from each position for predicted points for the game week. And surprisingly, well, not surprisingly in terms of the fixtures, but we haven't seen them towards the top of the list recently. But it seems to be that Man City defenders are heavily favoured this week. With their fixture against Southampton away from home, I think the odds are heavily backing them to keep a clean sheet above and beyond most of the other teams. So Ederson, as a result, is the top expected points for a goalkeeper. John Stones is the top expected points for a defender. I can only assume that's obviously because of the Man City excellent clean sheet odds, as well as Stones probably being the most goal-scoring defender that they've got. I'd also suggest at the moment there aren't many Man City defenders that are nailed, but I do have a feeling that Stones is probably favoured the most by Pep, which would suggest that he's going to play Southampton away. But to be honest, just overall, and I mentioned this in my buy and avoid video that I've uploaded earlier this week, I just avoid the Man City defenders entirely. You can't back any of them to start regularly. They just cause too much stress than is worth for a game like FPL that's meant to be fun. So yeah, I'd be avoiding the Man City defenders even though they come top this week. I think you need to make your transfers with a longer term view, and yeah, I just think the Man City defenders create too much stress. It's a pleasant surprise for me personally to see Kepa amongst the top for goalkeepers, as well as Chilwell as top for defenders, and you can see the rest of the players on the list here. Next up, we've got the top midfielders and forwards, and it's no surprise that these guys' points are the highest compared to the defenders and the goalkeepers. So, top expected points for a midfielder is Kevin De Bruyne, followed by Rashford, Saka, Grealish, Martinelli and Salah. And then for forwards, as long as he's fit at least, Erling Haaland is top for the expected points. And to be honest, if you were to ask me, I think he's going to be fit for this game week. Harry Kane in second, Alvarez in third. I think probably, they're both up here because it's not sure who's going to play out of them. And yeah, they're both going to do well, I think, if either of them play, essentially. But I think only one of them will. Isaac for Newcastle in fourth, followed by Jesus, Tony and Havertz. I actually think Jesus is a really nice option, and for once he's actually going to be quite low owned as well. So yeah, maybe if you're looking for an Ivan Toney replacement at this stage of the season, given that he gets his ban, I think Jesus could well be worth a shout. But yeah, top midfielders and forwards for expected points are all on this list. And then just as the overall captaincy decision, so this is the top players for expected points regardless of their position, with just a view of the fixture that they've got as well. So as we've just seen, Haaland tops the list in terms of expected points with 7.2, followed by Kevin De Bruyne, Rashford and Harry Kane. I personally am looking to bring Erling Haaland back into my team simply to cover this week as captaincy. I think Southampton away is too good of a fixture for Man City to ignore. I think Haaland will probably be back for the game. I think we'll know a bit more as the week goes on. It'll probably be pictured in proper training, and I think that will lead us to believe that he's going to start against Southampton. You can't trust what Pep Guardiola says, but there's enough people that have some good information around Man City to say whether he's going to play. And to be honest, I think we might get some early news before the deadline anyway. But yeah, I would say Haaland's the best captain this week. You could go for Rashford if you're not keen on bringing Erling Haaland in. I'd suggest really you'd only consider not going for Haaland if you're not free hitting in game week 32. Because Haaland blanks in 32, so if you're not free hitting that week, you plan to bring Haaland in, you're going to need to either transfer him out or bench him for 32. Whereas if you're free hitting in 32, you don't really care if they play in that week or not. So yeah, I'd say Erling Haaland top, but if you're not planning to free hit in game week 32, you could well go for Rashford, Kane. Well, I don't think you'll probably have De Bruyne in your team, so yeah, Rashford and Kane probably the best backups. And then just moving on to clean sheet odds, it really reflects the expected points for defenders and goalkeepers, really. Man City are top this week, 55% chance of a clean sheet against Southampton, followed by Man United, Aston Villa, Leicester, Chelsea, Leeds, Newcastle, Fulham and West Ham. I'd say anything below 30%, you can't really hedge or bank on a clean sheet at all. So West Ham and above are probably the teams you can expect or hope for a clean sheet from. The rest of them, I think you count yourself lucky if they get a clean sheet this week. The next up is just a view of players ranked by their likelihood to either be involved in a goal or score one. On the left is the goal involvement odds, and really it reflects the expected points for strikers and midfielders. Obviously it does, Strikers and midfielders score points based on their involvement in goals, so it makes sense that the two tally up. So Haaland is top of the tree for both lists. He's got 63% chance of scoring a goal and 69% chance of being involved in one. In fact, he's the only player this week with above a 50% chance of scoring a goal. That means he's the only player in game week 30 that is more likely than not to score, according to the Drafthound odds. I'm going to very rudely interrupt myself now just to say, if you're enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like rating and subscribe to the Golden Goal channel. I'm really trying to make 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season. And if you're enjoying the video and want to see more of me, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe. All right, back to the video. Okay, now we've got that feature out of the way, I thought it would just be worth drawing people's attention to the remaining fixtures that we've got for this season. I know Game Week 29 being a big double and a time where people played their chips, probably either a wild card, for example, or a free hit or a bench boost, something like that. Fixtures were really important there to understand what you're going to do. So I'd imagine you already have a good knowledge of the upcoming fixtures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the best way to play. If you've got some chips remaining, the best weeks which way can come into play as well. I've created this nice little graphic here which shows you the fixtures remaining for each team. So players that you should probably, or teams that you should probably be targeting players from that play the most fixtures for the rest of the season. So yeah, Brighton, Liverpool, Man City, Man United, Newcastle and West Ham all have either one or two more fixtures than the rest of the teams in the Premier League. So that would factor in my decision making, I think, around making transfers. So I mentioned chip strategy earlier, and just like last week, I'm joined by Big Sam in the kebab shop, and we're going to look at the menu and pick the best times to play the remaining chips in FPL. Right, so first up is the free hit. Now, if you've still got your free hit left, your team is, most people's teams, right, are going to be filled with Brighton players. They're going to have some Man United in them, a bit of Man City if you're buying Haaland, and probably a bit of Chelsea if you've got someone like Chilwell or Kepa in your team. All of these teams blank in Game Week 32, and rather than spending your free transfer to probably completely rip apart your team for this game week, you could simply use the free hit to avoid the blank fixtures for those teams and then have the same team going into Game Week 32, where a lot of these teams double again. So Brighton, they've got 3 double game weeks remaining this season, so 34, 36, 37, they're all double game weeks. So if you're selling your Brighton players ahead of Game Week 32 to only buy them back for their future game weeks, it doesn't feel an efficient way to play the game. So 32 free hit definitely makes sense. An alternative week, I haven't mentioned it here, but I do think Game Week 34 is another time where you could play the free hit chip. If your team, for example, was set up well to navigate Game Week 32 without a chip, you could well do so for 34 because, that's the biggest double game week we've got left. So if you maximise the likelihood of points that game week, it's going to be more advantageous than other ones when there aren't doubles. The teams that double in 34, if you're not free hitting in 32, will be teams that you don't own players from because you're not going to have the time or the opportunity to bring in players from those teams if they blank in 32. So yeah, if you're not playing your free hit in 32 because your team's not set up for it, the next best time is 34. But other than that, I think Game Week 32 free hit is completely obvious for most players. Next up, we've got the bench boost. I think a lot of us, including myself to mixed avail, have played our bench boost in Game Week 29. But as I was saying with the free hit, I think another time at which you could play that is the big double game week, right? If you've got enough players there from Brighton, Fulham, Liverpool, Man City, Man United and West Ham to fill either a team of 15 or you've just got an attractive bench, I think, the next biggest double game week of the season is the time to play the bench boost. There's not really much more than that other than, it makes sense to use your bench boost when your team plays the most fixtures across its players, right? I would say that 29 was probably the best time of all season to do that because it was the biggest double game week, 12 teams doubled. But 34 is the next best. 6 teams doubling. I think that's definitely enough to build yourself a nice bench boost team. I haven't mentioned the wild card yet, so here it is. I would suggest that really you want to use this wild card, if you've still got it left, to set yourself up for the double in Game Week 34. My view would be to use your free transfers to navigate yourself through Game Week 32, or maybe you're using your free hit. But I would suggest if you've still got your wild card to go, you want to use your transfers to navigate to 32 then you can either completely revamp your team in 33, ready for double game week 34, or just do it for game week 34, straight ready for the double. I'd suggest those 2 weeks are probably the best time to use, if you've got it left, your wildcard chip. And then finally, the triple captain. I'd imagine most people watching this video have used their triple captain. It'd be interesting, actually. Let me know in the comments if you've managed to use your triple captain well and scored some points out of it. I used it on Erling Haaland, I think back in, was it game week 16, game week 19, something like that. I can't actually remember. It might have been 20, when he had a double game week. It didn't go so well for me. And other guys that used it on Rashford a bit later on did much better. But yeah, there's no real surprise really when I've gone for best time to use the triple captain chips. I think there are 3 players in FPL at the moment that are worthy of receiving that chip. For me, it's Mo Salah. I think he's performing at a level, it's definitely a bit of a differential way to use it because he's not going to be the most popular. But I think Salah is definitely performing at a high enough level where you could see, especially in that Tottenham and Fulham double game week that I've circled there, he could get returns. I think Erling Haaland is the other obvious candidate. He's on track to break Premier League goal scoring records and the FPL points record, so he's absolutely a player to be using it on. And likewise with Marcus Rashford, his form in 2023 has just been unbelievable, and he's got 2 double game weeks, as does Erling Haaland, where you could be using your triple captain. Right, and on now to some players that I'm certainly considering bringing into my team, and I'm recommending to you that you consider doing the same. First up, no surprise, mentioned him all throughout the expected points data, it's Erling Haaland. I fully expect him to be back for game week 30. I think the way that Pep described him in training, I think he trained on Friday evening, didn't make the squad for game week 29, but I think regardless, he's going to be back and playing in game week 30. He's got potential to literally have the best season in FPL history, on track to break the Premier League scoring record. I think if he can stay fit for the rest of the season, he can absolutely do that. He's got the highest expected points for game week 30, the highest expected points for 31 as well. It just makes, in my opinion, total sense to bring him back in your team, and especially if you're free hitting in game week 32. Obviously, he blanks in 32, so if you're free hitting in 32, you can just bring him in and not worry about it because you can just take him out on your free hit. And yeah, I just wanted to point out his underlying numbers. They're the best in the Premier League this season. Over 1 expected return every 90 minutes. So I think he's, if you don't have him, I'd be absolutely terrified for these next couple of game weeks. So yeah, Erling Haaland's going straight back into my team, and I definitely recommend that you consider doing the same. Next up is a man that got a little bit of a mention earlier on, and that's Mo Salah. For me, he's not performing at the level he has been of previous seasons, right? But I don't think that's his performances, I think, have been just as good as last season. I just don't think Liverpool have been as good. And I think that's all down to the midfield, really. Their midfield just isn't as strong as it has been in previous years. That's both been affecting their defensive output and attacking output as well. They've been finding it difficult to find Salah in some games and also difficult to cover their defence. I also think the signing of Darwin Núñez is such an influential forward. The amount of involvement that he gets in the games, it also takes a little bit away from Salah, but I don't think it damages him too much, and I still think he's a great option in FPL. He seems to still be able to score goals against pretty much anyone. I mean, game week 29, he's just played Man City and he scored against the Etihad. He scored against them at the Etihad, sorry. I know they've got Arsenal at home, but I think Anfield is a different factor for Liverpool. Liverpool at Anfield are different to an away Liverpool. And I think Arsenal, they are definitely weaker defensively without Saliba. I wouldn't back against Arsenal scoring against Liverpool, but I'd also suggest that Liverpool can score against Arsenal. And if they do, it's got to come from Mo Salah, really. He's the best of their players. And the most nailed. I can quite easily see him scoring in that Arsenal fixture. And then looking at 31 and 32, Leeds and Forest, with Forest being during blank game week 32, with the likes of Rashford and Erling Haaland blank, other captaincy considerations most weeks, you'd say that he's probably the best captain for 32. And yeah, he's only 17% owned in the top 10k. I've used the top 10k as a bit of a measuring stick there for basically active teams. So I suggest the rest of FPL that are active probably follow something similar to that. So I'd say he's between 15 and 25% ownership amongst active players. So that's the lowest we've ever seen Salah since he probably joined the Premier League. When he broke the Premier League goal scoring record, for example. So Yeah, I think he's a great differential. And looking at the next 3 or 4 weeks, I think he's a great option too. And the underlying numbers, 0.7 expected returns per 90, they're not the best in the league anymore like they always used to be. But 0.7 is still really good, and I wouldn't let that put me off picking him. So yeah, I think Mo Salah's a great option, and you should definitely consider bringing him into your team, especially with game week 32 in mind. The next player that I'm recommending is Bukayo Saka. Now, I got completely trolled by him in game week 29. I saw a tweet saying that he was going to be benched because he was ill, and I thought it was an April Fool's joke because it was April Fool's Day, and he's literally one of the most nailed players in the Premier League at the moment. Unfortunately, he did get benched and didn't get any returns in game week 29 when I could have quite easily transferred him out for Bruno Fernandes. But to be honest, I think that might be a bit of a blessing in disguise because I think looking at the 3 next game weeks, obviously some are going to be playing their free hit in 32. I think those are good games for Saka. I know Liverpool away, traditionally you'd think that's a hard fixture, but I am not sold by the Liverpool defence at all, and I think Arsenal are going to score some goals in that game. Regardless of the result, I think both teams could probably score in this one. I think there's, like I said, there's goals for both teams, and that means points for Saka. He's literally been one of the best players in the Premier League this season, in my opinion. And I'd say if you're not free hitting in 32, merely the fact that he plays, and it's a good fixture, Southampton at home in 32, you're going to want to buy him ready for that game. And to be honest, I know I mentioned Salah with Nottingham Forest at home as a captaincy option. Saka, Southampton at home in 32, is also a captaincy option. I think that's a good game for him, and he could return well. And yeah, just looking at those underlying numbers, that all of the Arsenal mids are quite comparable in terms of expected returns per 90, but Saka leads the way in terms of expected goals. That's also propped up by the fact that he's on penalties, which I think just give him the edge over the other guys. When you look at Martinelli and Trossard as well, it's difficult now to know who's going to start. I think Jesus being back in the picture, it means the left-hand side of that Arsenal attack is a little bit more uncertain, whereas Saka, I think he's got that right-hand side locked down. Well, he does. He's got to play, hasn't he? He's the best player that Arsenal have, so I see him as being nailed for that position, whereas now maybe other Arsenal players not so much, which makes him a great option to bring into your team. And that's the end of the video. I hope you found it useful and it gave you all the info you need going into game week 30. If you've got any more questions for me, feel free to put them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And yeah, if you did enjoy the video, please leave me a like rating and subscribe to the Golden Goal channel. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season, and I'd really appreciate it if you came along for the journey with me. But until then, I'll see you in the next video.